On June 6, 1996, in the quiet Dallas suburb of Rowlett, Texas, two young boys were stabbed to death in their own home. Their mother, 26-year-old Darlie Routier, claimed a stranger broke in and attacked them while they slept. But investigators weren't convinced. What followed would become one of the most controversial criminal cases in American history. A mother's nightmare, or a mother's crime. This is the Darlie Routier case. To anyone looking in from the outside, the Routiers had it all. Darlie and Darren Routier were high school sweethearts who married young and built what seemed like the perfect life in suburban Texas. Darren ran a successful electronics testing company called TestNeck. The business was thriving, and they lived in a spacious two-story home on Eagle Drive in Rowlett, an affluent neighborhood just east of Dallas. They had 3 beautiful boys. Devon was 6 years old, energetic, outgoing, and loved by everyone who knew him. Damon was 5, quieter than his older brother, but just as sweet. And baby Drake was only 7 months old, the newest addition to their growing family. Darlie was known in the neighborhood as a devoted mother. She was outgoing, always put together, and took pride in her home and her appearance. Darren worked long hours, but by all accounts, the couple seemed happy. But beneath the polished surface, cracks were beginning to show. The Routier were spending beyond their means. Credit card debt was piling up. Darren's business, once booming, had started to slow. They had even discussed filing for bankruptcy. Still, none of their neighbors could have predicted what was about to happen inside that house on Eagle Drive. On the evening of June 5th, 1996, the Routier family spent a normal summer night at home. The boys played. Darlie and Darren watched television. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Around 1 in the morning, Darren went upstairs to the master bedroom to go to sleep. Baby Drake was already asleep in his crib upstairs. But Devon and Damon wanted to have a sleepover downstairs, so Darlie let them sleep on the floor of the family room, while she dozed off on the couch nearby. Then, sometime around 2:30 in the morning, everything changed. According to Darlie, she woke up to the feeling of her son Damon pressing against her, saying, "Mommy, Mommy." As she opened her eyes, she saw a figure, a man, walking away from the couch through the kitchen. She got up, confused and disoriented, and that's when she realized she was bleeding. Her throat had been slashed. She looked down and saw her boys on the floor, covered in blood. At 2:31 a.m., Darlie called 911. "Somebody came in and stabbed me and my children," she screamed into the phone. "My babies are dying. Oh my God, my babies are dying." The call lasted 5 minutes and 44 seconds. The dispatcher instructed Darlie to apply pressure to the boys' wounds and told her not to touch anything. Police arrived at 5801 Eagle Drive within 5 minutes. What they found was a scene of absolute horror. Blood was everywhere. On the carpet, the couch, the kitchen floor. Devon Routier, just 6 years old, was already dead. Damon, only 5, was barely clinging to life. He would die on the way to the hospital. Darlie herself had deep knife wounds across her throat and on both arms. One slash had come within 2 millimeters of severing her carotid artery. When investigators processed the scene at 5801 Eagle Drive, several things immediately stood out. The family room where Darlie and the boys had been sleeping was connected to the kitchen, which led to a utility room, and then the garage. Darlie told police the intruder had entered through a window in the garage, where a screen had been slashed. But when detectives examined the window, they found something troubling. The screen appeared to have been cut from the inside, not the outside, and the dust on the windowsill was undisturbed, meaning no one had climbed through it. A butcher knife from the Routier's own kitchen was found on the counter, covered in blood. It was determined to be the murder weapon. Nearby, a bread knife was also recovered, and forensic analysis later revealed fiberglass residue on its blade, consistent with it being used to slash the garage window screen. Blood spatter was found throughout the kitchen and family room, but the patterns didn't match Darlie's account. There were areas where blood had clearly been cleaned up, and investigators found diluted blood around the kitchen sink. Perhaps most telling was what was absent from the scene. There were no fingerprints from an unknown intruder, no footprints, no sign of forced entry at the garage window. The motion sensor lights in the backyard had never been triggered, and the family dog, who slept in the house, had never barked. From the very first hours, investigators from the Rowlett Police Department had serious doubts about Darlie's story. Within days, the investigation shifted from searching for an unknown intruder to focusing squarely on Darlie herself. The list of red flags was growing. The window screen appeared to have been cut from inside. The murder weapon came from Darlie's own kitchen. A bread knife with fiberglass residue suggested someone inside the house had staged the break-in. Blood evidence showed signs of cleanup. The motion sensors never activated. The dog never alerted. And then there was Darlie's behavior. Nurses and staff at Baylor Medical Center, where Darlie was treated for her injuries, later testified about her demeanor in the days following the attack. They described her as unusually calm, more focused on her appearance than on the loss of her children. One nurse recalled Darlie being concerned about whether the wound on her neck would leave a scar, not about Devon and Damon. Multiple hospital workers would go on to testify that Darlie never seemed to grieve the way they expected a mother to grieve. She asked about her jewelry. She wanted to know when she could wash her hair. She talked about getting breast implants. Now, supporters would later argue that grief manifests differently in everyone, and that judging a traumatized woman for not crying the right way is deeply unfair. But at the time, these observations planted seeds of suspicion that only grew stronger as the investigation continued. In her statements to police, Darlie maintained a consistent story. She said she fell asleep on the couch downstairs with Devon and Damon sleeping on the floor nearby. Sometime after 2 a.m, she was awakened by Damon pressing on her and calling out to her. When she opened her eyes, she saw a man walking away from the couch, moving through the kitchen toward the utility room. She got up and followed him. In the kitchen, she said she noticed a knife on the floor, and she picked it up, not realizing at that moment that she had been injured. When she reached the utility room, the man was gone. She turned back toward the family room and saw her boys lying in pools of blood. That's when she screamed for Darren, who came running downstairs, and then she called 911. Darlie's supporters point to her injuries as the strongest evidence that an intruder was real. The slash across her throat was deep and dangerous, within 2 millimeters of her carotid artery. She had cuts on her hands and forearms. She also developed extensive bruising on her arms in the days following the attack, which her defense argued proved she had struggled violently with an attacker. Would a mother really slash her own throat within a hair's width of death? Would she cut herself that deeply just to stage a crime scene? But prosecutors saw a very different picture. The prosecution's case against Darlie Routier was built on forensic evidence, and it was damning, Forensic expert Tom Bevel analyzed the blood spatter on Darlie's nightshirt and concluded that the patterns were cast off from the knife during the stabbing motions. This meant that Darlie was standing in close proximity to her sons while they were being stabbed, not asleep on the couch as she claimed. Blood evidence also told the story of a cleanup. Luminol testing revealed a trail of diluted blood between the kitchen sink and the utility room, blood that someone had tried to wash away. The sink basin itself showed traces of diluted blood, suggesting the knife had been rinsed. Then there was the sock. A bloody sock containing the blood of both Devon and Damon was found 75 yards away from the house, discarded in an alley behind a neighboring property. But here's the crucial detail. There was no blood trail leading from the house to where the sock was found. Someone had carried it there without dripping a single drop along the way. The window screen, which Darlie said the intruder had cut to enter, showed knife marks consistent with being slashed from inside the garage, not from outside. And the bread knife found near the scene had fiberglass dust embedded in its serrations, matching the material of the screen. Prosecutors argued that Darlie had killed her sons, attempted to stage a break-in, planted the sock, slashed the screen from inside, and then inflicted wounds on herself to support her story. They pointed to her diary entries from weeks earlier, where she had written about depression, financial stress, and even thoughts of suicide. They suggested the motive was rooted in desperation, a mother overwhelmed by debt and despair who saw no way out. But perhaps no single piece of evidence shaped public opinion more than a home video recorded on June 14, 1996, just 8 days after the murders. That day would have been Devon's 7th birthday. The Routier family held a memorial gathering at the boys' gravesite at the cemetery. A local news crew was there, and they captured footage that would change the trajectory of the case. The video showed Darlie standing at her sons' graves, spraying silly string over the headstones, laughing, chewing gum, and singing "Happy Birthday." She appeared cheerful, even celebratory. To millions of Americans who saw the footage on the evening news, this was not the behavior of a grieving mother. This was a woman who had killed her children and felt no remorse. Prosecutors played the video during trial, and its impact was devastating, but the defense raised a critical objection. The news crew had only started recording during the light-hearted portion of the memorial. Before the cameras rolled, the family had held a private, solemn prayer. Darlie had cried. They had spoken about the boys with sadness and love. The silly string was Devon's favorite thing. The family sprayed it as a way to celebrate his memory, the way he would have wanted. None of that context made it into the footage the jury saw. Many legal experts have since argued that this edited video, more than any forensic evidence, is what truly sealed Darlie Routier's fate. Darlie Routier's trial began in January 1997. Due to the massive media coverage surrounding the case, it was moved from Dallas County to the small town of Kerrville, Texas, about 300 miles away. Judge Mark Toll presided. In a strategic decision, prosecutors chose to charge Darlie only with the murder of 5-year-old Damon, holding the Devon murder charge in reserve as a potential second trial. Lead prosecutors Greg Davis and Toby Shook built their case on 3 pillars: the forensic blood evidence, the staged crime scene, and Darlie's behavior after the murders. They presented expert testimony on blood spatter analysis, the screen cutting, the cleaned-up blood trail, and the impossible sock. And they played the silly string video. The evidence will show you that this defendant took a butcher knife and murdered her 2 little boys as they lay sleeping, Greg Davis told the jury in his opening statement. Defense attorney Doug Mulder countered with a forceful argument. He pointed to Darlie's severe injuries, especially the throat wound, as proof that an intruder had attacked her. He argued that police had rushed to judgment, failed to properly investigate alternative suspects, and contaminated the crime scene. He questioned the reliability of the blood spatter analysis and emphasized the lack of any clear motive. "This woman nearly bled to death that night," Mulder told the jury. "She is a victim, not a murderer." The trial lasted approximately 1 month. Over 80 witnesses took the stand. The entire nation watched as this young Texas mother fought for her life. On February 1st, 1997, after deliberating for less than a single day, the jury returned its verdict: guilty. Guilty of capital murder. The courtroom erupted. Darlie broke down. Her family wept. The jury then moved to the sentencing phase, and their decision was unanimous. They sentenced Darlie Routier to death by lethal injection. She was transported to the Mountain View unit in Gatesville, Texas, the state's death row facility for women. At 27 years old, she became one of the youngest women ever sentenced to death in the state of Texas. As she was led from the courtroom, Darlie turned and said, "I did not kill my children. I loved my children." The conviction divided public opinion sharply. Many believed justice had been served, that the evidence clearly pointed to Darlie as the killer. But others were deeply troubled by what they saw as a circumstantial case, a rush to judgment, and a trial tainted by prejudice and a misleading video. The fight was far from over. In the years following her conviction, Darlie Routier's defense team launched an aggressive series of appeals. They argued that the trial had been fundamentally unfair, that key evidence had been mishandled, and that new forensic techniques could prove her innocence. Several issues emerged as central to the appeal. First, DNA testing. At the time of the original trial, DNA technology was far more limited than it is today. In 2008, a Texas court ordered new DNA testing on multiple items of evidence, including the bloody sock, the knife, and material from under Darlie's fingernails. Supporters hoped that modern testing would reveal the presence of an unknown male, the intruder Darlie had always described. Second, there was the matter of the unidentified bloody fingerprint. A fingerprint found on the glass coffee table in the family room had never been matched to anyone. Not Darlie, not Darren, not the children, and not any known visitor to the home. Whose fingerprint was it? The prosecution never adequately explained it, and the defense argued it pointed directly to an unknown intruder. Third, the defense challenged the blood spatter analysis, arguing that the methodology used at trial had since been questioned by the broader forensic science community. And fourth, they argued that the full silly string video, including the tearful, prayerful portion that preceded the celebration, should have been shown to the jury. The edited version, they said, was deeply prejudicial and denied Darlie a fair trial. As of today, Darlie Routier has spent nearly 3 decades on Texas death row. She is one of the longest-serving death row inmates in the state. No execution date has been set, as appeals and DNA testing continue to wind through the courts. She maintains her innocence as strongly today as she did in 1996. She has never wavered, never confessed, never offered an alternative explanation. She says an intruder killed her sons, and she has said it every single day for almost 30 years. Her case continues to raise difficult, unanswered questions. Who left that unidentified bloody fingerprint? Why was the sock found 75 yards away with no blood trail leading to it? Would a woman really slash her own throat within millimeters of death to stage a crime scene? Did the jury get a complete and fair view of the evidence? And what will modern DNA testing ultimately reveal? This case remains one of the most polarizing in American criminal justice history. Wherever you stand, whether you believe Darlie Routier is a cold-blooded killer or an innocent woman wrongfully condemned, one thing is beyond dispute. 2 innocent boys lost their lives that night in Rowlett, Texas. Devon and Damon Routier deserve the truth. 2 boys who never got the chance to grow up. Whatever the truth of this case may be, they are the ones who matter most.